kochavim, there are stars up above, so far away we only see their light long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the star that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us. As we live our days, these are the ways that we remember. Psalm 15 asks, Adonai mi yagor ba'ohelecha, Adonai, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain, those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may do not retract, those who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes, those who live in this way shall never be shaken. When words escape us, and in our sadness we turn to the words of our tradition, the words of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes, and we say, there is a time for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for being born, and a time for dying, a time for planting, and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for destroying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for refraining from embraces, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for tearing and a time for sowing, a time for silence and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. These are our moments, our times of gathering, of support, of love, of warmth, of sacred memory. And we know that when we confront the death of a beloved one, we become conscious of time's steady flow, and we plead, as did the psalmist of old, Limnot yamenu ken hodav v'navi levav chochma. So teach us to number our days that we may get us a heart of wisdom. And yet, how can one number one's days wisely? And we know it was as Marshall did, in the use that he made of the hours granted him in experiencing what life had to offer him, both its sorrows and its joys, its frustrations and its accomplishments, to become, as he did, deeply involved in the life of others, to give his love and his affection, to feel himself loved and appreciated, is to live wisely. It is then, we are taught, when one's hour has come, one has left behind him a legacy of memories to be treasured by children, honored by family and friends. When one has lived a life such as this, one can be grateful that God has indeed granted one a heart of wisdom, so that one might fill one's day with significance. Marshall was blessed with a heart of wisdom, and his life had deep significance to you who have gathered, to you, his family, his friends, and his community. He was born and raised in Rochester to Max and Esther Cohen, and was the youngest of 3 deeply loved children. He was blessed to be born into, as Laura noted, an enormous extended family, as Marshall's father had 15 siblings, right? Bringing to the family fold unending cousins with whom he was exceedingly close, gathering each Sunday as they did over family dinners. Deep and close relationships were built with laughter, love, and stories at the core, all of which helped to shape him into the man he would become. Attending Franklin and then later the University of Buffalo, Marshall studied to become a pharmacist, the career which took him to Strong, to Size Drugstore, to CVS, and ultimately, after retiring, working perhaps in his most favorite of places, the VA pharmacy, where he worked. This was a wonderful, wonderful piece of information, where he worked for a man for whom many years earlier he had babysat. It is a good cycle that he enjoyed. In 1956, in one of these very pharmacies, Marshall met Doris, the love of his life, after being introduced by their respective friends Shirley Schwartz and Howard Jacobson. And from this beautiful union came their children, Laura, David, and Janice. May her memory be for a blessing. And then Laura and David, who in turn with their mates, Michael, who is lovingly remembered today, and Miyuki, brought into Marshall's life his adored grandchildren, Max, Adam, and Claire. As a pharmacist, a Boy Scout leader, lifelong camping enthusiast, ice skater, winemaker, arborist, long-distance bike rider, antique clock collector, and self-taught musician, Marshall was a Renaissance man, a man of many passions, a family man, devoted, loving, supportive, and filled with joy. In their nearly 6 decades of marriage, one that Doris described as loving and strong, she said that not only because of the hot air balloon ride he convinced her to take, nor the glider rides he enjoyed, that theirs was a life that took her to the highest of heights. To speak more of his life, his legacy, and those heights are some of you who join us this morning. We begin first with a message from his son David in Taiwan that will be shared by his son Max.
Thank you all for coming. It really pains my dad that he couldn't be here today. But I'll be sharing a message that he sent to all of you. I'm sending this message from Taiwan and apologize for not being able to be at Dad's funeral service today to share these words with you in person, especially to Mom, to Laura, Max, Adam, and Claire too. I apologize and send my love. I know these past weeks have been horrible, but I'm comforted in knowing that Mom is surrounded by family and friends today. And I've heard about all the help and support so many of you have given to her and to Dad through the whole of Dad's illness, and thank you for this. Mom and Dad had a special relationship that I won't even try to put into words, because I can't do it justice. I grew up never thinking about it, and probably assumed that it is just the way things are for everyone. Only with age did I come to know that their partnership is something special. A product of their specialness together is a large circle of close friends that they have, friends who regularly shared their time with each other and who made sure to be there with each other through the ebbs and flows of their lives. From life-changing events to dinner clubs, a meal out at a favorite spot in the city or on the lake, or an afternoon concert, I'm sure many of you are here today with others because of age or distance, which they could be here physically, but certainly are here in spirit, because they cared so much about Dad. Your caring, deep, shared sadness are a testament to Dad's character and our love for him. Mom and Dad always came as a pair to me. The music that their lives made, always a duet, or maybe a fugue. But it was also music that is impossible for me to separate the melody from the harmony, the subject from the counterpoint. This is how close they are. An over-analysis would diminish its beauty. Everyone who knew Dad, though, quickly came to know his unique humor and wonderful mind. We all could admire how he pursued his passions modestly but deeply. His clocks, the Fiat, the Alpha, his love and mastery of the clarinet, and then taking up the saxophone later in life, along with what I think almost everything else across the single reed woodwind gamut. His knowledge as a pharmacist, too, I always found amazing, and he worked hard on his feet all day, for long days, for many years, and maybe paid the toll for this later on in life. When we were kids and growing up, Dad and Mom made sure our summers were filled with camping trips and vacations on lakes or in the mountains with our close family and friends. We learned to explore and were never discouraged from going into the directions we chose to go, even all the way to the other side of the world. So maybe Dad's pursuit of his passions led us to find the same dedication to what we choose to do in our lives. And no matter what, Dad and Mom always supported us in whatever we chose to do. And were always there for us. Interested, curious, caring, and proud. And whatever interest, caring, and pride Dad showed for his children, it was multiplied 10 times. It was multiplied 10 times for his grandchildren, Max, Adam, and Claire. Mom and Dad would drive for hours and hours to spend an afternoon with the grandkids. And share with them a special bond that helped them grow into the wonderful adults they have become today. That was also our bridge to the traditions in our faith, and you are gathered today once again in the same congregation where I was bar mitzvahed with Dad by my side to say goodbye to him. From deep in our hearts, Miyuki and I thank you for all of your sharing your lives, friendship, love with Dad, and for the strength, support, and love you are now giving Mom. David Cohen. If I could mind. Thank you.
Joining us now, we invite to join us Paula and Jeff Levy and Leanne Sherkaski to share some additional words.
Jeff is here, as well as my mom, Ellie, and I'm Paula Levy. I'm speaking for our entire family. I think my childhood I can describe as the Cohens, Levys, and Schwartz. I think I was 4 years old when my parents went to a dinner party and met Doris and Marshall. And that's kind of where the bond began and continued to grow stronger over the many, many years together. We really looked at the Cohens as our family. We really don't think of them as friends. We were born into a family, but we spent every holiday, every dinner, every vacation, multiple camping trips, fishing trips with Marshall and my dad, Hal, where Doris and my mom would get stuck cleaning the fish and cooking it after they came back. Jeff and I were talking, and we remember Washington, D.C. I, of course, remembered the bugs in the room, and I wanted to sleep in the car, but most of the people remember Doris's organization of running us from museum to museum for 3 days straight, hardly eating or sleeping. There was the time we went to Maine where we stopped to see Robert Frost's grave and ended up putting our campground together in the pitch dark. And the list goes on and on and on with Lake Placid and multiple trips that we've spent as families together. Jeff specifically remembers going to Michigan. I don't know why I don't remember this. Maybe I was traumatized with 9 of us in one van. In 10-hour drive in a caravan across the country. You know, we've spent so many dinners and holidays together that I don't even think we have to organize or speak about it anymore. We all kind of know what we're bringing and who's responsible for what. We used to spend every other year doing our Thanksgivings and Passovers, and when Doris and Marshall got their new home, it was so perfect for entertaining that we just moved everything there, and we've loved every minute of it. Marshall was the consummate host, always entertaining and supplying the wine, and Doris and Marshall always sat at the head of the table. They always had wonderful words of love for all of us, and as our family grew, we're on our 3rd and 4th generations now, and we've brought in friends and partners, and it's really something very special that not everyone gets, even with their own family. I just wanted to talk just a little bit, and I know I promised to be short, about Passover, because this last Passover we spent together was really great. Marshall has, as everyone knows, a wit and humor and the gift of conversation for every single generation, whether it was the young generation in our family or the old, and he was always so interested. And Seder became more than just reading the book and telling the stories. He spent a lot of time talking about how he grew up with his own family and Seders, and he always tied it into current affairs and what's going on in the world, which was really special and brought even our younger generations, friends and girlfriends and boyfriends into the conversation and made it special for them. And we will always remember him.
I'm Leanne. I was supposed to be on a plane today from California to Hawaii. Instead of flying 5 hours west, I flew 6 hours east. That tells you how important the Cohen family is to me. It gives you an idea of how important Uncle Marshall and Aunt Doris were in my life, my parents' lives, my siblings' lives. As Laura said yesterday in an introduction of me to someone, she said, "We are cousins by choice." Aunt Doris reminded me that yesterday, my parents, on their way out of the state, introduced them to the Levies and to the Schwartzes, and they developed this lifelong friendship that kept everyone connected. We would drive most years from our home in Chicago or in Michigan to Rochester, and we would stay with the Cohens. That was our home away from home. It was our home base. 94 Fairmeadow Drive was our home base. And we would stay in the basement. All the children would stay in the basement together. So it was me and my 3 siblings, and Laura and David and Jan. And we grew up together. And that's a really important tie. When we would go to family reunions on my mom's side of the family, it always surprised me that the Cohens weren't there. Because to me, they're my cousins. They lived across the street from my cousins. We could go back and forth. But again, they were home base. No matter where in the US we lived, Aunt Doris and Uncle Marshall were at our weddings and our bar and bat mitzvahs and our funerals. And it's really important to me to be here and be part of this now. I associate Uncle Marshall with really genuine warmth and bear hugs and caring and a hearty laugh and a dry sense of humor. Passion for families and friends and clocks and fishing. The locks and canals, pharmacy. He was the one who encouraged my sister to join the VA. She's really happy working there. Uncle Marshall was really loving and really strict. He was very careful about making sure that the younger generation respected the older generation. There was always a title that was important to teach us respect. And like with their children, they gave us a lot of freedom, but they always set really clear expectations with a lot of love. As my sister was telling yesterday, she always felt that Uncle Marshall really sat down and listened to her. He really paid attention to each of us, and he gave us that love and attention. A favorite family story is that when Aunt Doris and Uncle Marshall traveled with my parents when we were young, they were driving on a long, windy mountain road, and they realized that that was probably not a wise idea because Aunt Doris and Uncle Marshall were our godparents. If something happened to my parents, they were the ones meant to look after us. It never had to happen, but it was always so wonderful and reassuring to me to know that Uncle Marshall and Aunt Doris loved us so much, and they were always there for us. In a recent phone conversation, Uncle Marshall was talking to me for a long time, and he was talking about his family and his father's mother and how she finally married her high school sweetheart, and with their 16 children between them, that he was so happy that she had taken on the name Cohen, so he didn't need to be a Rakatovich. And that he was named his name Marshall Gordon. Gordon came from Gershon, which was his step-grandfather's name. One final note I wanted to share is that before my father passed away, he shared advice with me. He said to me, just remember that everything important that has to be said has already been said. That even though there's always more we want to tell someone, the important things we've said. Uncle Marshall knows how much we all love him, and we know how much he loves us.
Joining us next will be his niece, Marshall's niece, Jackie Robbins, and following that will be Max, Adam, and Claire, who will come up together following Jackie. So Jackie, if you would please join us at this time.
I was at Aunt Doris and Uncle Marshall's wedding. I remember it well. Kindness, generosity, intelligence, sensitivity, strength, genial host, humor, laughter. These are but a few of the words that come to mind when I think of Uncle Marshall. His kindness extended from the bratty nieces his fiancée was babysitting to these same children's aged parents 50 years later. He was generous, always happy to pour the wine, and he shared with us some very good wines. He was always also willing to lend a hand and to listen. Even in the years when he himself was far from well, he always had time for others. I admired so much his stoicism, good humor, and gentle, dry wit. Our visits to Rochester were joyful family events, memories I will always cherish. But most of all, I will remember the years and years of laughter, often sparked by a witticism from Uncle Marshall, the gales of uproarious laughter around the family table, whenever the Listen sisters, their spouses, and their families would get together. He will be greatly missed.
We didn't coordinate, so we might repeat some of the same things. So sometime earlier this spring, my mom and Adam and I were sitting down for a post-half marathon pre-Mother's Day dinner, and the topic of our grandparents came up, and we started talking about something that had kind of been on my mind for months, if not years, which is, as I've gotten older, I've become kind of struck by how uniquely kind and good-hearted Papa is. And this was months ago, and we were talking about this at a random dinner. And so it's something that I just kind of want to take note of. And that kind of warmth and kindness was, of course, something that I felt enveloped in my entire life by him and by Grandma. But it wasn't until I kind of became an adult that I understood the unique depth and breadth of his heart. It wasn't just kind of your average grandfather's love for his granddaughter, but it was a special kind of goodness that showed itself in sometimes the most unsuspecting of ways. It came out in such specifically pop-up ways. It came out in his interactions with anyone who entered his home. Any nurse who's ever interacted with him would tell you that their 30-minute appointments would turn into an hour and a half, because he would get so invested and involved in kind of chatting with them and sharing his iconic library of stories and hearing their own. And it came out in a wink or a half smile from him across the Seder table when he bested my dad, who was the self-anointed funniest, smartest, most charismatic man in every room, in a debate or while telling a story. It came out in mid-afternoon phone calls that he would call me at school to check in once in a while and remind me to call my mom. And so there are so many things I'm so grateful that I was able to share with him in the last few years, like their last-minute trip to Maine for my college graduation, and his unbelievable support and encouragement throughout this incredibly hard year. But something that I never got to share with him was this conversation that we had a few months ago, and the way that his deep goodness and warmth never went unnoticed by those around him. And I know I speak not just for myself when I say that trying to learn from him and emulate even half of that heart has made me a profoundly kinder, softer, happier person, and I'll forever be grateful for that.
Hi, I'm Adam, Claire's brother. So first of all, before I dive into this, I'm going to go off script immediately and talk about how there are certain things that I associate most with pop-up, namely, the music, his clocks, things like fishing. We did maybe a couple times when we were kids with him, but it was not, a big part of my relationship with him. And there's a lot of other things that I've been hearing about that I don't really associate with him. And I was thinking about that as people were talking, and I think that's because he really didn't force it. He was so careful about who he was with at any given moment that he would find that common ground with them specifically. And that's why I'm not that into fishing, so it wasn't something that we ever did together. Instead, he found his own ways to connect with me, as he obviously did with everybody else here. Okay, so back to the script. Is actually, we should have coordinated, because I was also going to talk about how my understandings of pop-up grew as I grew older. I've always loved him, and when I was a little kid, he was as warm and funny and playful as you could expect anybody to be. But as I grew older, I started to notice something different, something a little bit deeper, and something invisible that was under the surface. It was there with all the jokes and comments that he made and all the actions that he did, but it was also there when he was silent. And I'm sure anybody that's ever been at a dinner party with him, can tell you, sometime between the hours of 11:30 and 1, it would feel like he was focused on something else, something that was not really in the room. Sometimes it even seemed like he was disinterested or distracted for a moment from the conversation, which would be worsened by the fact that when he finally did speak up, it was usually a meandering and barely tangential story. And yet, by the end, he would always bring that story home with a punchline that left no doubt in anybody's mind that he not only had been listening, but he was 3 steps ahead of what we were talking about. He gave that same intensity and care to everything that I ever saw him do, including and most importantly, his love for his family and for Grandma. It was quiet and deep. It was unfaltering, but it was ever present. I know that we all felt it, and I hope that we can all internalize that and try to live our lives with a little bit of it.
I'm going to start by going off script as well. We really should have coordinated this.
Adam got it really late last night. We didn't have time.
Because mine's about fishing. Yesterday, we were out on a walk along the Erie Canal, Grandma, Laura, Claire, and Leanne and I. And coincidentally, it was the same place where Grandpa took us fishing during childhood. I don't know if you guys have ever fished in the Erie Canal, but there are plenty of carp, and potatoes were the choice of bait that we used, actually. And I was in middle school, elementary school, when we went fishing, and I mean, they're not huge, but for me they were strong, especially using, a fishing reel probably made from the 40s or 50s, whatever was in the Fair Meadow Drive basement. And there are times where, the fish they'd put up a huge fight, and, they were too strong for my, at the time, probably about 100-pound frame, and we had to cut the line. And, to this day, I'd like to think that there's some carp out there with a Fair Meadow Drive hook still in their mouth, swimming around. I don't know why the carp were so strong or why they resisted the pull so much, but I visited Grandpa in the hospital last month, and he was putting up a fight stronger than any Erie Canal carp you would ever see. And I don't know why the carp resisted my pull, but I can tell you exactly why Grandpa put up a fight. I don't know why there's a reason to any of this. I don't know why we're here, but I can tell you with 100% conviction that Grandpa was put on this earth for one sole purpose, and it's to make you smile. Marshall simply loved his family. And, he never explicitly said who his favorite grandchild was.
He did when you took him to it.
But I think we all know the answer. Adam, it's time we admitted defeat, declare. Grandpa loved his grandkids, but it's clear who the love of his life was. Grandpa was a jovious man, but I do admit there were occasional references that flew over my head. Maybe some were too dry or perhaps too witty for me to grasp, but I never failed to see Grandpa get a laugh out of Grandma. They would call me over the phone, and in conversation there would unmistakably be a Marshallism in there that, that would make me chuckle, but the same Marshallism would send Grandma into hysterics. You ever seen Grandma laugh until she was wheezing and coughing? One of those? Maybe 5 times an hour in a phone conversation. Which brings me to the one request I have of each and every person here. Today is a day of grief, remembrance, and tribute. But starting tomorrow, I want each of you to ask yourself, what would Marshall do? I could go on, and like my dad said, there's things that you can overanalyze. There are questions in life that are easy to overanalyze, but impossible to answer. Why are we here? How did an Erie Canal carp outwit someone 10 times its size? How was I so lucky to have had the privilege of 25 years with Grandpa? But the answer to what would Marshall do is very simple. He would make sure that Doris Cohen keeps laughing, even in the bleakest of times, and I request that each of you keep that legacy alive. Thank you.
There is really nothing left for me to say. So let me just, first of all, thank all of you for being with us today. Most of you know the sorrow and loss that our family has suffered over this past year, and we are so very grateful to all of you for your love and support and friendship. Many of you upended your lives and traveled very long distances to be here today, and your presence in this space that has played such an important part in our family's life means the world to us. So as we've heard, the dominant themes of Dad's life were friendship, music, curiosity, and family. Let me add to that his pride of place. He was a lifelong Rochesterian. He had a deep attachment to this place, which he conveyed not only to me and to David, but as you've heard a little bit from his grandchildren. They, all three of them, although they grew up very far away from here, are indubitably products of this place, and those of you who are here and those of you who shared your lives with Mom and Dad. In fact, when Dad was in the ICU 4 weeks ago and couldn't speak, Adam and Max paid tribute to him by going out on a culinary pilgrimage in search of that most local of delicacies, a white hot dog. And when they returned and reported success, even though Dad couldn't say anything, his smile lit up the room. It was in him and a piece of him. Dad was the inveterate and incomparable storyteller. We've heard about sitting around his dining room table, listening to him spin yarns that somehow intertwined an anecdote from the old neighborhood, a conversation had on some boat that was gliding down the Adriatic, a chance encounter at a Webster band concert, a hummingbird, and all of this somehow defying gravity was hysterically funny, made sense, and taught a life lesson. My husband, Mike, who was also a consummate storyteller, loved Dad's stories and often said that it was his goal to emulate Dad's cadence and timing and meaning. Dad reveled in family. He was expansive. He was amoeba-like in his embrace. At each stage of life, he encircled the newest members of the family, whether they be biologically connected or the Sullivan family, who is here and connected through choice. And yet, despite all of that, over those 63 years, he really only had eyes for Mom. And up until a week ago, that was true. And even in these last years when his mobility made it challenging for them to go out a lot, I would call them at dinner time and they'd be sitting around the dinner table and I couldn't get a word in because they were just laughing. I have an image of them dancing at a show that Adam played a few years back. And it was an outdoor show, and there were people all around. And there they were, dancing to rock and roll, glowing at each other, keeping the beat together with smiles that lit up the night. Paula mentioned our vigil to Robert Frost's grave. Dad was an adventurer of all sorts. He and Mom traveled incessantly as soon as they were able to and for as long as they were able to. And they always found a way to make an adventure out of the mundane. And so one of those mundane adventures was visiting Robert Frost's grave in the middle of the night with 10 young kids and a bunch of flashlights and several volumes of poetry. And for those of you who are at our wedding, you may remember that Dad, in one of his brilliant but slightly lengthy toasts, decided to read a 4-page Robert Frost narrative poem. And so, as we hear Dad's music reverberating through our ears, as we think of his enormous, generous heart and his incisive mind and his embrace of friends, I want us also to hear poetry, because he heard poetry in his life. And so this is Robert Frost Come In. As I came to the edge of the woods, thrush music, hark. Now, if it was dusk outside, inside it was dark. Too dark in the woods for a bird, by sleight of wing, to better its perch for the night, though it could still sing. The last of the light of the sun that had died in the west still lived for one song more in a thrush's breast. Far in the pillared dark, thrush music went, almost like a call to come in to the dark and lament. But no, I was out for the stars. I would not come in. I meant not, even if asked, and if I hadn't been. We'll love and miss him and hear his music forever.
Music is, you have heard, such a vital part of who and how Marshall lived his life, who he was, how he was. We have the gift of your music. We have the gift of Adam's music as he joins us as this time to play a song that is important to the family and we hope will resonate in your hearts as well. Marshall has made for us a life of blessing to which we can say, Amen.
Amen.
Join us, please, if you're able, as we rise for our concluding prayer for El Malay Rachamim.
El Malay Rachamim, Shahen Bamramim, Hamtzehem Elcha Lechana, Tahat Kanfi Ashkina, Im Gerashim Udehorim, Kezahar Harakeya, Mashirim, Et Nishmata, Mordechai Gershon ben Moshe, Shechalach le'alamo, Barachamim, Yestirehu beseder knafav le'lamim, V'etzror b'etzror chachayim et nishmato, Adonai hu na'alato, V'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'namar Amen.
Fully compassionate God on high, to our loved one who has entered eternity, grant him clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold him in the embrace of your wings. Secure his soul in eternity. Adonai, he is yours. May he rest in peace, and may we join together and say, Amen.
Thank you, Cantor. Thank you, Rabbi. Friends, this concludes the services here at the temple. On behalf of the family, thank you for coming today and showing your support. The family has decided that they would open up the burial to the public, so if any of you would like to join us at Whitehaven Memorial Park, we're going to be leaving from here. We're not going in procession, we're going to just meet at the main entrance, and then when we meet at the main entrance, when everyone's there, we'll drive down to the grave for our very, very brief interment. And again, I would remind you that the family will be receiving tonight and Saturday from 7 to 9 at 8 Framingham Drive Lane in Pittsburgh. Thank you. If anyone needs directions to Whitehaven, just ask me. It's truly a couple turns, so it's not too far from here.
I'll meet you right back to your feet. I'm so happy to hear you were here. I never see And I know you represent all your siblings and everybody.
We walked through your neighborhood and walked through your mother's street. My daughter, one daughter really liked the house. And,
Time of the night, shade.
Okay, all right. We will all be riding our bikes through there, and your house is gorgeous. So.
The inside is very.
Maybe we'll knock some time and surprise you.
That's good. I ran for the car.
I haven't seen it. Yeah. Do you have a program?